Part 87. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guangguanggongzi. Chapter 861. 2 years later. On the winter solstice of the third year of Jianping, a fine and dense light snow fell on the streets and squares of Chang'an City. The morning bell rang through the streets. Tens of thousands of people stood on both sides of Zuk Street, beside the fences and windows of restaurants and tea shops along the street. The literati gathered and looked at the center of Zuk Street. A chariot with 5 horses riding abreast passed by Zuk Street. Yang Zunyi, the general of the Ziliang army in front, held a big flag high and wrote the word Su. Behind the chariot, there are neatly arranged Ziliang cavalry, armed to the teeth, like steel fortresses. They have just returned from the battlefield in the Mobei grassland. The bloody smell on their bodies has not dissipated, and they are shaking the world all the time. At the end of Zuk Street, the palace gate was wide open, and the imperial guard stood with their heads bowed, waiting for the prince's chariot. Outside the Taiji Hall, civil and military officials were standing around. Emperor Songling of Daiyue, who was only 12 years old, was standing on the steps waiting quietly, holding a tray with the imperial seal on it. Today is the day when the emperor of the Song dynasty will take his throne. Although the scale was large and there were many princes and generals present, the atmosphere outside the hall was not very solemn. Because it is not so much a Zen ceremony as it is a celebration banquet for the Su family. The Ziliang army has been fighting for nearly 3 years, conquering South Vietnam, pacifying the south of the Yangtze River, and sweeping the northern Qi dynasty where the 2 kings were fighting. Although Songling has not yet taken off the dragon robe on her body, everyone already knows that the world's surname is Su. Well, what we are doing now is just a necessary process. No one cares what the Song family thinks or whether Songling can achieve Zen status. Under the general trend, personal will has no influence on the overall situation. On the day Su Buling returned from Mobei with the Ziliang army and a full load of Zhang clan members, the old man of the Song clan ran to Prince Su's mansion sincerely and expressed that Songling is young and difficult to control overall situation. I hope King Su can take over the imperial city's wish. Naturally, King Su sternly refused this unreasonable request. Then the young Emperor Songling summoned King Su and talked about the Zen throne. King Su naturally had to refuse. He even took off his python robe on the spot and said that he would retire and return to his hometown, showing that he had no intention of seeking imperial supremacy. Then the 5 great nobles, civil and military officials, and soldiers of the 3 armies knelt in front of the palace to ask King Su to succeed him. King Su had no choice but to reluctantly accept it, and said on the spot that he would treat the Song family members favorably. Everyone knows what kind of winding doorway there is down here, and it even looks a bit hypocritical. But in his heart, Su Wangsuyu still sincerely did not want to ascend the dragon throne. After all, Suyu and Songji were brothers, and his father Su Lai and the Song emperor had a life and death friendship. He accepted Songling's Zen throne. No matter how legitimate the throne was, he came to take over his nephew's throne. In the history books, it seems that they all have the intention of bullying the old master and being disloyal and unjust. Originally, Su Wangsuyu's intention was to act as regent first, and then let Su Buling accept the Zen position when he was buried one day. But in the end, after thinking about it, letting Su Buling accept the Zen position would not be good for future generations' reputation. It would be better for him, the father, to take the blame directly. In this way, Su Buling would have an innocent identity as the prince and ascend to the throne naturally. There is no need to engage in these hypocritical tricks to deceive yourself and others. Amidst the resounding sound of bells, the carriage passed through the palace gate and arrived at the steps of Taichi Hall. Su Wangsuyu got off the chariot, and his eyes under his white hair looked at the dark crowd around the square, and his eyes seemed to be as if they were from another world. Back then, when Suyu and Princess Su left Chang'an hand in hand, he never thought that he would come back again, let alone that one day he would be able to stand in this position and watch everything in the world. And Suyu was not the only one who felt as if he was in another world. In the palace on the right side of the square, hundreds of princes, and ministers stood here to watch the ceremony. The head of the Xiao family, the head of the 5 great clans, Xiao Ting Xiao, the eldest son, held a folding fan in the cold winter month. His eyes were full of sighs. He shook his head and said, "When I was standing here in the past, I was still using the money my aunt used to buy rouge, betting whether he would win or lose in a fight with others. Who would have thought that in just a few years, his father would become an emperor? What if I become that in the future? If you become prime minister, don't you have to nod and bow to him all day long?" Meng Hua, who was wearing Haoming uniform, took her daughter's hand and bumped Xiaoting with her elbow. "Can you put the fan away? What do women know? This is called elegance. There are 10,000 people in the field, but you are the most elegant. You are not afraid of people's jokes and you are still the prime minister. You are suitable to be a pig butcher. Hey, if I can't beat you, I have to let you understand what husband gang is." Next to Xiaoting were the heads of other clans. Lu Hongzin was Lu Hongluan's elder brother, and Su Buling's brother-in-law was naturally very happy to see King Su ascend the throne. Kui Huilu of the Kui family in Yuzhu and his wife Wang, thanks to the good fortune of Kui Zioan, the big tyrant in the back house, became the heir of the country again, so they were naturally happy. 4 of the 5 great nobles are related by marriage to the Su family. The only remaining young master, Li Si, is obviously a little unhappy. He has been walking around these days, hoping to make Su Wang Suyu a successor and establish a queen. As for whether it can be done, just it's unknown. Behind the 5 gates are a group of princes, and ministers. Song Yufu's father, Song Baking, is still the chief minister of the Imperial Academy. The South Vietnamese monarch Chen Jin, because her daughter Chen Xining successfully captured Su Buling, was now granted the title of county prince. She did not have to worry about Su Buling settling the accounts in the fall, and the Chen family was saved. She stood in the crowd with a smile on her face. Zhang Kai, the monarch of the northern Qi dynasty, stood behind Chen Jin. Zhang Kai was a miserable man. He had the status of a prince, but not the luck of Su Buling. Not long after he inherited the throne of northern Qi, before he could settle the civil strife, Su Buling came to him again and defeated the troops of the 2 kings. Zhang Kai was afraid of Su Buling from the bottom of his heart. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, he was straightforward. Before the Western Liang army arrived at Guiyan city, he opened the city gates and surrendered alone. Su Buling admired Zhang Kai very much and did not make things difficult for him. He made him a duke and treated Zhang well, which was a good ending. After being captured and released 3 times, Zhang Kai lost his temper. After arriving in Chang'an city, he lived a salted fish in peace and contentment, perfectly interpreting what it means to be happy and not mischi. He even tried to get close to the Queen Mother Jija, but no one knew what the result was. In addition to these princes and noble sons, there were also many people in the martial arts world who helped the Su family conquer the world. Needless to say, the Lu family of Donghai, the relatives of the Prince Su, have now become royal relatives. Lu Baiming's position is directly on par with Xiaoting and others, which shows his nobility. Sword Saint Zulu, as Su Buling's father-in-law, has also been conferred a title, but the people in the martial arts world don't care much about this. He just opened a martial arts hall in Hutai Street to pass on the Zhu family's swordsmanship. Li Hansheng is a loner. He originally wanted to return to Shu to guard his wife's grave, but after his relationship with King Yi eased, King Yi didn't want to leave his relatives again, and finally worked with his old partner Zulu as a master in the martial arts hall. Chen Chong of Beijiang is good at fighting and fighting. He and Su Buling went north to attack Qi and made many contributions. Now he has entered the official career as a military officer. Because he is very good at chatting, he is doing well in the officialdom. The rest, Sidu Yuejin, Lin Yuzong, Zhou Zhan, Zhou Yizi, Lu Wei and other people who had dealt with Su Buling, were all watching the ceremony in front of the stage. Su Danking, Mei Kushan, He, and others from the lineage of the old master, who have always been more fairy-like, did not come. In addition to these men, there were also many women present. Lu Hongluan sat in the side hall, watching the coronation ceremony of the eldest brother Suyu from behind the bead curtain, holding Suyi, who was less than 3 years old, in her arms. Although she gave birth to a child, Lu Hongluan's appearance and figure did not change at all. After Su Buling returned from Mobei, in order to compensate for her loneliness during the 10 months of pregnancy, he has been accompanying her well these days. Maybe he didn't sleep well last night and was a little distracted. Xiao Qi, wearing the robe of the prince's wife, stood upright behind the bead curtain. Seeing the prince sitting on the dragon throne, there was a look of relief in her eyes. In the past few years of fighting, Xiao Qi was both a military advisor and a logistics minister. She followed Su Buling to travel all over the country and paid more than anyone else. Now that the world is settled, she can retreat behind the scenes and be a little woman with peace of mind. She is naturally much more relaxed. Compared with her two sisters, Xiao Xiang'er, who was dressed in a red palace dress, had a much more complicated expression. Xiao Xiang'er didn't want to come here today, but she couldn't resist the instigation of her sisters and still ran over. Xiao Xiang'er has been in this palace city for 10 years. She once dreamed of going out. Who would have thought that she would go out and come back again? From the queen to the queen mother, then to the grand queen mother, and finally to the woman of the future emperor, it feels like this trip out is like a waste of time. Kui Zioan stood behind Xiao Xiang'er, holding Xiang'er's arm with both hands, and watched with a smile. Although Kui Zioan also ran out of this imperial city, she didn't have as many thoughts as Xiao Xiang'er. No matter where she was, as long as Su Buling was in front of her, it was enough. Behind Kui Zioan were Ning Yuhi and Zhongli Jiju, two sworn enemies, who still ignored each other and looked after each other. Ning Yuhi was born in Jianghu, and now he was embarrassed to be a Taoist priest, so he followed King Yi to practice martial arts. He was not old, and under the stimulation of Chen Xining, he had made rapid progress in the past 2 years. Zhongli Jiju's life was much more fulfilling. He knew everything. In addition to studying medicine and keeping fit, he also set up a zoo at home in his spare time, raising various rare and exotic animals. In the distance of the 6 older sisters, 5 little girls stood together with telescopes and watched with interest. Zhu Manzi has now arrived in Chang'an City. As she wished, she returned to the Wolf Guard and became the honorary chief of the investigation department. The first thing she did was to transfer the chief clerk who said there is such a good thing when she resigned to raise horses. In addition, Zhu Manzi is also the honorary owner of the martial arts hall opened by Zhu Liaozhuo, and she has the posture of unifying the black and white worlds. Needless to say, Chen Xining was skilled in martial arts and got along well with Manji. After returning from northern Qi, she also went to the detective department to get a position. Privately, she also invested in a snail noodle shop on Zhuangyuan Street in Daifang, specializing in promoting authentic South Vietnamese cuisine. As a result, the shop next door dared not speak out. Ning Qingyi was originally a good sister of Manji, and she also wanted to be better in swordsmanship, so as not to be completely suppressed by Chen Xining. She spent all day in Zhu Liu's martial arts hall learning swordsmanship. Zhongli Chuchu's martial arts skills have never been high, but she still has talent. In addition to practicing martial arts and studying medicine, she also opened a dance class on Kuishao Street to teach the daughters of wealthy families piano, chess, dance, and music. She can be considered versatile. Song Yufu is the only girl who does not know martial arts. Her hobbies are reading and teaching. After she and Xiao Qi finished fighting, she returned to Chang'an and set up a kindergarten. Her life was much more fulfilling than on the ship. As for little Nightingale, since she was Su Buling's personal maid, she followed Su Buling on marches and battles. She helped him deal with military affairs during the day and helped him relieve his loneliness at night. When he returned to Chang'an, she worked as a housekeeper. She didn't come today. Snow was falling in front of the Taiji Palace. As the imperial flag of the Song family was taken down and replaced by the flag of Prince Suyu sat on the dragon chair in the Golden Palace. The transition between the old and new dynasties of the two dynasties was completed. Outside Chang'an City, several cannon shots were heard. At this time, the common people and literati in thousands of streets and squares celebrated the arrival of a unified and prosperous dynasty. Prince Su's crown prince, Su Buletinling, bullies men, dominates women, and forces good girls to be wives. This is the end of the story. Near the turret of Changfang City in Chang'an, there are a series of Gulan gambling houses. The rogue idlers gathered around the tea stall, with a brazier at their feet, listening to the storyteller finish telling this long story. The storyteller sat at the tea stall, wielding a cane stick. After finishing his words, he picked up the teacup and took a sip to moisten his throat, and continued. Next, I will tell you a story about a prince of a country who sought immortality and asked questions. That prince was really powerful. Hey! The idle man sitting by the brazier was getting excited when he saw that the storyteller was about to change the scene. He was a little unhappy and asked without saying anything. No, you haven't finished speaking yet. The storyteller paused for a moment, then turned his head somewhat dissatisfied. What haven't you finished talking about? What else do you want to hear after we've talked about it so far? There's no point in talking about wars or anything like that. It's better to listen to the ridiculous things about that bastard prince who deceived his teachers and destroyed his ancestors, and kidnapped fairies everywhere. The idle man waved his hand. Anyone who can sit here wants to hear about the war. They are all thinking about things that won't make it to the table. Yes. You seem to have missed one just now. Where is the little peach blossom? Why did it disappear at the end? The storyteller put down his teacup, smiled, looked at the houses on the street, and said with a smile. Little peach blossom, haha. Daifang, Qingxi Lane. The light snow is like catkins, sprinkled on the bluestone floor tiles that have been passed back and forth for countless generations. The yellowed wine flags swayed in the wind and snow, evoking the aroma of wine, as if integrated into the bricks and woods of the old wine shop, making people drunk before even holding a glass. The old shopkeeper, who had mostly snow-white hair, was a little hunched over, but his face was still energetic. He had a towel on his shoulders and walked around in front of several large wine vats, chatting with the only drinker in the shop. Listen to the bell, it's time to hand over. If the young master doesn't come, aren't you afraid that your father will deal with you? The handsome young man in white was sitting at the wine table by the window, with 2 plates of side dishes and a pot of old wine in front of him. The young man in white looked drunk but not drunk, holding a jade pendant with a small peach blossom engraved on it. After hearing the words of the old shopkeeper, the young man in white put away his jade pendant, picked up the wine bowl, and took a sip of duan yusheo, which was spicy in his throat. It's just a formality, there's no fun in drinking. The old shopkeeper laughed, took a pot of warm wine, sat down across the wine table, and poured himself a bowl. Everyone wants to stay with his beautiful wife and concubine, but the road ahead is one that must be walked and cannot be escaped. Su Buling curled his lips and said nothing. He just came back from Baiki and was dumbfounded by his wives. He needed to slow down and it was not easy to talk about this. The old shopkeeper picked up the wine bowl, touched it with Su Buling, and talked about the recent affairs in the world. Su Buletinling drank it all in one gulp, smiled, listened quietly, and sometimes commented a few words. The wine is not finished yet, the person is not drunk yet. The old shopkeeper raised his wrinkled eyes and looked outside the wine shop. This eagle is good. Su Buling put down the wine bowl, turned around and looked outside the fence, and saw a snow-white-haired sea turtle standing on the opposite side of the courtyard wall, tilting its head and looking at him. Snow was falling in the alley, and a tall woman in fox fur was walking slowly from the entrance of the alley. The woman is very tall, probably on the same level as Su Buling's eyebrows, with almond-shaped eyes and red lips, as beautiful as peaches and plums. Her long black hair was braided into 2 braids, hanging down her back, and a long cloth bag hung on her back, which contained 2 iron guns. Su Buling was stunned for a moment when he saw the woman's face and figure, but he still recognized who it was from those aura eyes. Su Buling stood up and walked outside the wine shop. He looked at the oncoming woman and felt relieved. "Xiao Dehua, where have you been in the past few years? I went to Baiki to look for you, but I couldn't find you anywhere. I went overseas. Also, my name is Zozo." The little peach blossom has a tall and straight figure and a bulging skirt. She no longer looks like the little girl who licked candied haws in the past. Even her voice has changed. But what hasn't changed is that she still has a small purse hanging around her waist, and there is a silver ingot in the purse. The little peach blossom stopped in front of the wine shop, 10 steps away from each other, separated by the wind and snow. She took off the long cloth bag from her back and spliced the 2 iron spears together. Su Buling saw the scene and spread his hands slightly. "Come to take revenge on me." Xiao Dehua put together the iron spear, pointed the tip of the cold iron spear diagonally at the ground, and raised her eyes to look at Su Buling. "Big brother has been kind to me, and I won't kill you. But the master has been as kind to me as a mountain, and I have to avenge him. Let's have a fight and wipe out all the past grudges." Su Bulenling's eyes were helpless, looking at the big girl who already looked like a royal sister, and shook his head. "I haven't heard such a crazy tone for a long time. What did your master say to you before he died? Did he find you a fairy master?" Little Peach Blossom twisted the tip of her gun. There was no emotion in her eyes, or maybe all the emotions were hidden deep in her heart. She said calmly, "Master said that Big Brother is just a mortal. Master has fought with you and knows your limit. He said that I have a good talent and can catch up with you in 2 years at most." Su Buling glanced up and down. "You have practiced for 2 years, and I have practiced for 2 years. How can I catch up? Your master is good at misleading his disciples." Xiao Dehua frowned slightly, but the confidence in her eyes did not dissipate. She raised the tip of the gun and pointed it at Su Buling. "Big brother is just self-taught. I learned from the god of war Zojaixian. Big brother should not underestimate the enemy." Seeing this, Su Buling sighed softly and said, "What will you do after the fight? Come home with me." Xiao Dehua blinked and was silent for a moment. "Let's talk about it after the fight." "Okay." Boom. As soon as the words fell, 2 figures soared into the sky in the wind and snow. Outside the wine shop, the yellow wine flags fluttered with the strong wind brought by the 2. This book is compiled and produced by the official account. Follow VX Book Friends Basecamp, read books, and get cash red envelopes. The white eagle landed on the fence of the tavern, and looked up at the sky with the old shopkeeper. While the old shopkeeper was distracted, the white eagle secretly pecked at the old shopkeeper's wine bowl. "How's the wine?" "Goo goo." "Hee hee, it's good as long as it's strong enough." The so-called Jianghu is actually an ordinary little tavern. Some people come, some people leave. Some people reconcile, and some people become enemies. The story begins because of wine. As long as the wine does not change, the story will never end. Year after year, what you see in the tavern is nothing more than one reincarnation after another. Su Buling fell from the sky, picked up the wine bowl on the table, drank half a bowl, and fell to the ground again. Then he stretched out his arm, caught the little peach blossom that fell from the sky, and carried it out of the bluestone alley. The clear liquor melted the snow and seeped into the bluestone road that had been trampled by the Jianghu people for countless years. This bowl of wine. Cheers to the Jianghu. The end of the book. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 862. Tanghulu. Selling coal, don't do it, it's annoying. The new year has just passed, and the red lanterns have not yet been taken down among the thousands of streets and hundreds of squares in Chang'an City. On Hutai Street, Ning Qingyi, who had just come out of the martial arts school, was holding a snow-white sword and selected a few plump candied haws on the stack of candied haws on the street. At the back of the street, the iron claw gate where Zhu Manlong once stood has now been replaced with a sign. On it are the 4 characters Zhuejian Villa handwritten by Su Buling. The gilded signboard shines under the warm winter sun. Sword Master Zulu and Li Hanzhong stood side by side outside the gate to see them off. Next to them were the Jianghu people who came to apprentice one after another. Even the owners of several other martial arts schools were lining up in the crowd, hoping to be defeated by the 2 martial arts masters. A few words of personal guidance. Ning Qingyi's expression was as cold as usual. After waving goodbye, she took a few bunches of candied haws and turned towards the outside of the imperial city. Chang'an City is very large. With the change of dynasties and the introduction of the New Deal, envoys from many small countries outside the customs also rushed to Chang'an City after hearing the news to meet the new emperor of the Celestial Empire. Foreigners can be seen everywhere in the neighborhood, and all nations come to court. The atmosphere is intense. Ning Qingyi took the Buling sword given to her by Su Buling, and first went to Daifang Qingshi Lane and bought 2 pots of broken jade, and then came to Zhuangyuan Street. Directly opposite Longjian Pavilion, there was originally a jade shop, but now it has been renovated and turned into a restaurant. There is a signboard hanging above the restaurant, which reads Liu's Hu Snail Noodles. The calligraphy and silver painting are also written by Su Buling. The decoration of the restaurant is more elegant than the Longjian Pavilion opposite. It's a pity that the 3-story restaurant was completely silent. There wasn't a single customer. Only the neatly dressed waiter could be seen standing in the lobby in a daze. Chen Xining, wearing a long aqua dress, was sitting alone at the door of the restaurant, doubting her life. 2 little snakes were coiled next to the flower bed at the door, basking in the sun. Ning Qingyi walked up to him and waved a candied haws in front of the dazed Chen Xining. Sining. When Chen Xining came back to her senses, she thought a guest had arrived, and her eyes were filled with joy. However, when she saw that it was Ning Qingyi, she continued to look at the street listlessly, holding her chin, and complained. Qingyi, do you think there is something wrong with the taste of the people in Chang'an City? Such delicious food only costs 5 cents a bowl, and no one comes to the door. I defrauded Man Zi of all his private money. If it were this year, if I can't make my money back, I'll have to be scratched to death by her. Ning Qingyi raised her eyebrows. Although she didn't know how to do business, she knew how to count. The prime location opposite Longjian Pavilion cost no less than 10,000 taels of silver to buy. It was only for the sake of the royal family that the owner reluctantly parted with it. Not to mention selling snail noodles here, but also running a brothel, the beauty of the girl will almost cost her life. However, the property belongs to the Su family, and there is no need to pay rent. It is okay to let Chen Xining enjoy it, but it is obviously impossible to get back the money. Ning Qingyi didn't want to attack Chen Xining, so she just sniffed. The snail noodle smells bad. It has just been opened, so diners don't know the details, so they don't dare to come. Well. Chen Xining pursed her lips. The business failed, and she felt a little unable to hold her head up at home. But as the diners didn't come to the door, she couldn't hold them down and force them into her mouth. At the moment, she could only stand up, pat her skirt, and go back with Qing yet. Let's go and look at the sky with some confusion. King Yi, don't you go back after practicing until dusk every day? Why do you go back so early today? Ning Qingyi shook his head and smiled. Today's Lantern Festival, Su Buling said that he wanted to draw a family portrait, so he had to go back early to prepare. Chen Shining suddenly understood, nodded, and looked at Kong Ningfang. Did Manzi go on errands today? Do you want to call her? Ning Qingyi spread her hands slightly, feeling helpless. Manzideo went there on time for a few days, but after 2 days as chief officer, he found that he didn't know anything, so he would sit on the Taishi chair, drink tea, and nod his head. He was afraid of being laughed at, so he wouldn't go there if nothing happened later. What else could he say? Big shots don't show up easily. Chen Shining understood, smiled, and returned to Kuishao Street with Ning Qingyi. Behind the 3 large archways on Kuishao Street, there are many residences of princes, generals, and ministers. Originally there were not many merchants, but now there is an art studio in the center of the street, which specializes in teaching music, chess, and dance to the rich and powerful people on the street. The owner is naturally Zhongli. Neat. Compared to Chen Xining's unpopular restaurant, this art shop is much more prosperous. Half of the wealthy girls on Kuishao Street are nymphos. They dared to block Su Buling's door back then. Now that Su Buling has become the current prince, he will occasionally come to pick up people. Naturally, they flock here to see Su Buling. Ling Yufan could stay from early in the morning until the art shop closed. Playing together with wealthy daughters is also an important means of socializing. The wealthy families on Kuishao Street naturally acquiesce to this. Chen Shining came outside the art studio and saw that there were carriages and sedans parked outside, and she couldn't help but feel a little envious in her eyes. Ning Qingyi said hello to the housekeeper, and soon, Zhongli Chuchu, who was wearing a red dress, ran out and waved goodbye to Miss Qinjin from Kuishao Street. Chen Shining raised his eyes and said softly, "Chuchu, if you leave, who will teach them how to dance?" Zhongli Chuchu walked in front of the 2 of them, looking slightly embarrassed. "What can I teach? I originally wanted to teach them, but there were too many people and I couldn't teach them, so I asked my husband to call 2 court dancers from the palace. The result was great. They were so professional. I was too embarrassed to play, so I just learned along with him." Zhongli Chuchu is self-taught. When it comes to dancing skills, she is definitely not as good as the musicians and dancers in the palace who specialize in teaching the maids to dance. When Ning Qingyi saw this, he smiled and comforted. It's good to have someone to support it. It's better than Shining not opening until now. These words really comforted Chu Chu, but the price was that Chen Shining shut herself down on the spot. Zhongli Chuchu knew Ning Qingyi's straightforward temperament, so he smoothed things over with a smile. The snail noodles made by Shining are okay. We all like to eat them, but the reputation has not spread. After a few days, let Uncle Li, Uncle Zhu, and Su Buling go there and have a meal every morning, and then let Man according to rumors in Zhifang, the martial arts masters of today are so powerful after eating this that they can even break the threshold of their shop. When Chen Shining heard this, her eyes lit up slightly. Can we still do this kind of business? Ning Qingyi raised her eyebrows. It seems that this idea came from your master. Zhongli smiled sweetly, yes. My master was afraid that I would waste my husband's money, so he planned to do this, but before he could use it, the threshold of the art workshop was trampled to pieces. The 3 girls chatted and laughed, walking back to the street together. Prince Su's mansion had been renamed as Su Mansion. Although the big plaque had been changed, King Kui's small signboard was still hanging on the side door. Not long after the new year, the red lanterns outside the mansion had not yet been taken down, and the maids and servants were coming in and out. Lao Xiao moved a small bench, holding a cane, and sat outside the gate drinking tea and telling jokes. I think back then, when I was walking in the Chu region, I happened to meet the young and energetic swordsman Sidu Yuejin. As the saying goes, the brave will win when we meet on a narrow road, so I went over and called Sun Thief. Guess what? Under the red lantern is a small tea table and a wheelchair. Zhu Manzi was wearing a small skirt, sitting next to the wheelchair and eating melon seeds. Hearing this, he said with a little disdain. You need to guess? Who in the world doesn't know that you were chased by old Sidu for 700 miles, from Juyi Mountain to Yueyang? Hey! How can you call me chasing and chopping? That old man didn't even touch the corner of my clothes. I walked him for 700 miles. On the wheelchair, a tall and graceful woman was covered in white bandages, leaning against her like a mummy. The only thing that could move in her body was her big, spiritual eyes. The big white eagle stood on the back of the chair, listening carefully to the Jianghu jokes, and from time to time he would coo at the woman, as if to say, look at her, and then look at you. Zhu Manzi felt the same way. He turned to look at the woman and joked. Xiao 12, look at Lao Xiao. He ran to find trouble for Dao Kui. If nothing else, he was at least sure of getting away. It's better for you. You ran out and hid for 2 years without saying a word, and you want to hit me when you get out of the mountain. My husband, are you okay now? I have to feed you. If I didn't want you to call me sister, I would have to teach you what it means to be dangerous. Little Dahua, who has grown into a big girl, is much taller than Manzi, on par with Chuchu, and her stature is even more exaggerated. When Su Buling resisted her return that day, when Zhongli Jiju was treating her injury, she said, stuffing milk branches. This joke can make the broad-minded Manzi very angry, and he will hit the little peach blossom no matter what. Little Dahua sat on the recliner and couldn't move. She just blinked and hummed. I let your husband-in-law do it, and I didn't do anything cruel. Who knows whether he was gentle or serious? If I had known, I wouldn't have held back. You are so stubborn. You are not suitable for practicing martial arts and traveling around the world. It would be great to just have a baby and take care of it at home. Zhu Manzi was cracking melon seeds with sour eyes. When he saw the 3 sisters Ningqingyi coming back, he quickly pretended to be the elder sister and waved with a smile. You're back. Xining, how's business today? How many bowls of noodles did you sell? Chen Xining didn't want to speak, so she silently walked to the steps, turned the wheelchair in a circle, and pushed it towards the house. Aren't you going to draw a family photo? Come in quickly. Ningqingyi handed the candied hus to Manzi. Manzi took the candied hus and ate it in front of little Peach Blossom. Little Dahua leaned on the wheelchair, her eyes moved, and she said hesitantly. Sister Xining, I'll just bask in the sun outside, and you can just go and do your work. Zhongli Chuchu smiled when he heard this and said, on the left, you have already entered the door, how can you still treat yourself as an outsider? Ningqingyi also nodded, yes, even the position of Xiao 12 has been decided. If you don't come in, won't Manzi become the youngest? Hey, Xiaoning, if you don't know how to speak, just speak less, it will hurt your feelings. Several girls pushed the wheelchair into the gate of the mansion together. In the Su family's back house, the atmosphere was equally lively. In the garden of the back house, Lu Hongluan sat in the pavilion and asked Xiao Xiang'er to help arrange her bun. Xiao Qi has resigned from all positions and can be a young woman with peace of mind. Now she has changed her old and serious attire, put on a palace skirt similar to Xiang'er's, and used a bronze mirror to light up her rouge. The garden outside the pavilion is full of peach blossom trees, and the peach blossoms are in bud. Su Yi, who is almost 3 years old, is running around in the garden holding a rattle. Kui Zioan held up the hem of her skirt, made a fierce look, and chased around the peach tree. From time to time she said in a crisp voice, "Don't run away. If you run away again, I'll beat you." I'm very fierce. Xiao Xiang'er was sitting in the pavilion, seeing Kui Ziowen's helpless look, and felt a little funny. Hongluan, my 3-year-old baby can only walk with help. Your son is better. I'm afraid that if I don't pay attention, he will jump over the wall and run away. Lu Hongluan's gentle cheeks were full of smiles. She thought about it and said softly. That's what Princess Su wrote to me about when she was only 3 or 4 years old. She was so upset that the palace was so restless that she turned over while sleeping. In the end, she couldn't send her to live in the Sea of Flowers. It's a big bed so that Ling'er won't have to sleep on the floor in the morning. Like father, like son, maybe Suyi will be as good as Ling'er in the future. When Xiao Qi heard this, she shook her head and said. Don't let him learn martial arts so early, otherwise he will run away in 2 years. A few days ago, I asked Man Zi to take Suyi for a walk, and the result was great. Man Zi secretly took the 3-year-old baby to a restaurant and listened to her when Su Buling went to pick up Man Zi. Suyi was listening to the legend of the Fenhe sword god that he had compiled. In Su Buling's words, she wanted to slap the table on the spot, pick up the sword and go out to fight in the world. Lu Hongluan shook his head and smiled. A boy must be good at both civil and military skills. It is better than following Xiang'er's example and building a lot of construction projects when his brain gets hot. No matter how big the family fortune is, it can't afford such trouble. When Xiao Xiang'er heard this, she was a little dissatisfied. She raised her hand and patted Lu Hongluan on the shoulder. I call it benefiting future generations. If that bridge is repaired, it will be much easier to travel along both sides of the river. It's so convenient. You just want to see Ling'er build a peach blossom pier for Xiaowan. You're jealous. You're going to return the baby bridge, are you ashamed? Do you care? Xiao Qi listened to the two bickering, shook her head and smiled, then looked at the sky and asked. Where did Su Buling go? Outside the pavilion, Yunu and Chiao Yi helped take care of the children. When they heard the question, Yunu turned around and said. The young prince has gone to the Imperial College to pick someone up. He should be back soon. Chiao Yi thought for a while and said, Sister Yu he is also following me. I can't tell when she will come back. As soon as these words came out, the girls in the pavilion blinked. Yunu bumped Chiao Yi with her arm, apparently feeling that Chiao Yi was a bit talkative. After Su Buletinling came back from northern Qi, Yunu and Chiao Yi also entered the house as a matter of course. Yunu did not change much, but after Chiao Yi got her wish, she obviously became stupid. Her mind was filled with the little prince, and sometimes she spoke but the brain. However, Xiao Xiang'er and others knew about Ning Yuhi's hobby, so they didn't comment on it. They just smiled knowingly and stopped asking. After chatting for only a few words, several little girls came to the garden and the atmosphere became lively. On the other side outside the imperial city, near the bell and drum towers, the corridors were covered with snow. The sound of reading loudly came from the distant study room in the Imperial College. Su Buring was wearing a white robe, standing under the bell and drum tower, looking at the big clock above with extremely nostalgic eyes. Zhongli Jiju stood in front, shielding the warm winter sun with his hands, looking at the bell and drum tower above, and asked. Ms. Sir, you were here and stayed for a whole year. Yes, I copy books up there every day. There is also a room below for solitary confinement. After Su Buling looked at it for a few times, he walked into the bell and drum tower. Ning Yuhi's eyes looked a little strange, he glanced sideways at Zhongli Jiju, and said lukewarmly. Xiaju, if you don't torment your zoo honestly, why are you here? Zhongli Jiju was gifted since childhood and could tame birds and animals. After settling in Chang'an City, he set up a place behind the house to tame rare and exotic animals as pets for the sisters in the house, and to study medicine. Normally at this time, Zhongli Jiju should be at home to abduct little peach blossoms babying, but today when she was about to go there, she suddenly saw Ning Yuhi sneaking out of the house, and Su Buring also left the house first. Zhongli Jiju knew Ning Yuhi very well and knew what the stinky Taoist nun was planning to do, so she immediately ran over to prevent Ning Yuhi from eating alone. Seeing Ning Yuhi's eyes gritting his teeth secretly, Zhongli Jiju felt refreshed and hugged Su Buling's arm with a smile. "You're a little bored after staying in the house all day. Would it bother you to go out for a walk? More than just getting in the way. The tale is ready." Ning Yuhi pursed his lips, finally unable to explain clearly, so he walked quietly beside Su Buling and stopped talking to Zhongli Jiju. Su Buling knew the thoughts of the two young daughters-in-law, and enjoyed seeing through them without telling them. He took Yuhi and Jiju for a walk around the bell and drum tower, then turned around and went to the depths of the Imperial College. In Wenqiyuan, the princes and nobles were still studying there, Song Baking was teaching there, and Xiaoting's snoring could still be heard faintly. When Ning Yuhi walked through the door, he raised his eyes and saw Xiaoting sleeping soundly in the study room, and said doubtfully, "Your Majesty, Mr. Xiao is already the head of the family, why are you still studying here?" Su Buling was a little busy these days, so he really didn't pay attention, and he spread his hands in confusion at this time. Zhongli Jiju knew it and said a little funny, "I heard from Sister Xiang'er that a few days ago, Xiaoting went to a poetry club and was praised for being brave and resourceful, which made her a little overwhelmed." "What do you mean? This is called a person who is better than a person who is good at it. From now on, Dad might even have to write a song called My Prime Minister's Son. Don't you think it's something that needs to be dealt with?" The next day, I was hung up and beaten by Sister Kikai, and was thrown into the Imperial Academy to rewrite the Book of Rites. My Prime Minister's Son. Su Buling held it in for a long time and nodded slightly. Great wisdom is like foolishness, this is called hidden clumsiness." Ning Yuhi's warm cheeks were full of weirdness, he thought for a while and said, "With Zhang Zhou hiding like this, his level is much higher than yours, my lord." Su Buling really had nothing to say about this. If he had half the skills of Xiaoting, he would not have bothered to hide in Xiang'er's bedroom. When the 3-year period was up, he would have gone back to be a prince. The three of them chatted and laughed as they came to the back of the Imperial College. In the past, male and female students studied together in the Imperial College. It was a sacred place where everyone was taught without discrimination, and there were not so many stereotypes of corrupt scholars. However, Song Yufu came back to teach. She had married Su Buling and had a special status. It was not good for her to teach those princes and nobles. Moreover, with her own knowledge, she could only substitute for the class, and could not teach the real students of the Imperial College. In order to meet Song Yufu's wish to be a teacher, Su Buling specially opened a new schoolhouse at the back of the Imperial College to teach students who had just started to read and write. It was also a disguised kindergarten. Even the name was called kindergarten. At this time, in the primary school with birds singing and flowers blooming, more than 20 children aged 4 or 5 sat behind a long desk in an orderly manner, holding books in their hands, and muttering in childish voices. Kenji wrote books to teach his descendants. Young sons should be careful and respect the admonitions. Bamboo curtains hung around the study. Between the desks, Song Yufu, dressed in teacher's clothes, walked back and forth with a ruler in her hand, reading a sentence and pausing to let the students read along. Maybe because Song Yufu was strict in teaching children, the atmosphere in the school was very good, and everyone was studying seriously, which was a world of difference from Wenqiyuan not far away. Su Buling stood in the distance and watched, and did not go in to disturb them. Until the bell rang in the distance, the children stood up as if they had been pardoned and ran to the servants waiting outside. Song Yufu put away the scroll and walked out quickly. "Husband, why are you here so early?" "Sister Yuhi, Sister Jiju. Collect free good books. Follow v.x Book Friends Base Camp to recommend your favorite novels and receive cash red envelopes. Song Yufu came closer, bowed slightly, and then walked in front of Su Buling. Su Buling turned and walked towards the road home, smiling. "It's okay at home, come and see." Song Yufu smiled, looked back at the children who were walking away, and only complained softly after they walked away. "Sister Ziowen's niece is too naughty. During lunch break today, she pulled the ears of the grandson of Sheofeli and made him cry. I asked her why she hit him, and she said confidently, 'I saw him fall down and cry, so I went to comfort him, but he kept crying, and I couldn't help it, so I hit him. I don't know what to say.'" Song Yufu muttered, rather than complaining, it would be better to say that she was sharing these interesting things with her family. In the past, Song Yufu had basically no areas of expertise on the ship. She was older than her elder sisters, and she didn't know martial arts, so she couldn't chat with her younger sisters. She almost became depressed after 2 years. Now she has returned to the Imperial College and has become a teacher as she wished. She can show her knowledge in the areas she is good at. Song Yufu's complexion has improved a lot every time she comes back at night. She can chat for a long time, and she is more talkative than Manzi and Sining. Su Buling was naturally pleased to see Yufu like this. Like all husbands, he walked in front of her and listened carefully, nodding in agreement from time to time. Ning Yuhi and Zhongli Jiju walked behind, and they returned to their usual appearance. You glared at me, I glared at you, and when they found Su Buling turned around, they pretended to be harmonious and smiled softly. The family of 4 returned to the front door of the Su family on Kuishao Street in a happy atmosphere. Outside the gate, Lao Xiao was still holding a purple clay teapot and talking about the glorious years of the past. The audience was replaced by Manzi and Xiao Tahua, and the little nightingale who was waiting for someone at the door. The little sparrow stood on the shoulder of the nightingale like a master, and came to him quickly. "Sir, why did you come back just now? The garden is ready, and it will be difficult to paint after dark." A few years later, the nightingale was nearly 20 years old and had grown into a big girl. Following Su Buling to the north to attack Qi, and accompanying Su Buling day and night, the nightingale's temper was more ferocious than Qiaoyi, and she had already eaten Su Buling up. However, unlike Xiao Tahua, who changed a lot when she grew up, the nightingale still had white skin and a slender figure. Except for being a little taller and having longer braids, there was not much change in other places. This can be seen from the fact that Yi squatted on the shoulder of the nightingale in the cold weather of the first month of the year. Su Buling touched Nightingale's head and said, "Let's go in." Several people walked up the steps. Su Buling tilted his head before entering the door and looked. "Old Xiao, why don't you go in?" Old Xiao wore a small cap as a servant, sipped his tea without even raising his eyelids, waved his hand and said, "The young prince has already started a family and established a career, why should I follow him? I finally have some peace and quiet, I don't want to join in the fun." Su Buling nodded, hesitated, took out a book from his arms, and threw it to old Xiao. "I just bought it casually." After saying that, he entered the mansion. Old Xiao raised his hand to take the book, picked it up and glanced at it, frowned slightly, and his expression immediately became serious. "Wow, Spring Palace Jade Tree Picture, Part 2, where did the young prince get it from?" "Old Xiao, I have been reading it for a lifetime, and I didn't know there was a second half. I'm afraid I can read it until I'm buried." There was no response to this. Su Buling led a few girls to the backyard, and saw that the little sparrow was a little listless, and asked curiously, "Why is Yi so listless?" Nightingale raised her hand and touched the little sparrow, "It's all because of the trouble on the left. They brought back an eagle, which is bigger, stronger, and prettier than Yi. I wanted to touch it, but it wouldn't let me touch it." Chirp. The little sparrow suddenly became unhappy. It flew up and landed on Jiju's lapel, with a look of breaking all ties. Su Buring chuckled, and quickly came to the garden without disturbing the little sparrow. In the garden, seats have been set up, and the dancing girls are chasing the little baby around, while the little baby grabs the big white goose's neck and spins it around, refusing to let go of anyone. Little Dehua was sitting in a wheelchair next to the stone pavilion, watching the girls playing around, with a smile in her eyes. However, when she noticed Su Buling coming over, she quickly turned her face away, and accidentally pulled the injured part of her body. He let out a light woo. Su Buling walked up to him, pushed his wheelchair towards the open space in the garden, and asked softly, "Little Dehua, how is your health?" "It's good. Once my injury recovers, I will return to Mobei. Your mother has already moved to Chang'an City, opened a fur shop in Zhuangyuan Street, and signed the marriage certificate for you. What's the point of running to Mobei? You can't win with force. Then let's fight again after the injury is healed. This time I will use 70% of my strength. You don't need to let me go. Then you still have to lie down. Lie down, just lie down." After 2 years of absence, Xiao Dehua has indeed grown up a lot. She is tall and has well-proportioned limbs. Her lukewarm attitude makes her voice sound like a royal sister. It's just that the whole body is covered in bandages, which looks really funny. With a smile on his face, Su Buling pushed Xiao Peach Blossom to the open space in the garden, and then sat in the middle of the chair. Seeing this, Lu Hongluan came over, picked up the little baby holding the rattle, and sat beside Su Buling. Xiao Qi, Xiao Xiang Zhongli Jiju, Ning Yuhe, and Kui Zioan sat on the chairs one after another. Several young girls, Song Yufu, Ning Qingyi, Zhongli Chuchu, Zhu Manzi, Chen Xining, and Nightingale, stood behind the chairs. Yunu and Jiao Yi stood on both sides, carefully arranging their clothes. Across the open space, the palace lady who was painting paintings for the concubines in the harem had already set up the painting table, fingered the paintbrush, and was preparing to write. Su Buling looked around and said doubtfully, "Where's Daodu?" Song Yufu was stunned for a moment before she remembered that the maid was gone. She turned around and saw Daodu, who was 16 or 17 years old, still looking like a child, with a red face and peeking behind the flower bed. Jiao Yi hates the fact that iron cannot become steel. "Daodu, come here quickly, why are you standing there like that?" "Oh." Daodu smiled shyly and quickly stood beside Jiao Yi. Everyone laughed out loud, then quickly put away their smiles and looked serious, so as not to look bad. It was just that the painter had just worked up his mood and had not yet started writing. Little Dehua, who was sitting in the wheelchair at the front, suddenly realized something was wrong and said, "Sisters, is this painting going to be passed down to future generations?" Xiao Xiang nodded, "That's natural, it's specially for future generations to pay homage to their ancestors." Xiao Dehua blinked her eyes, lowered her head slightly and looked at herself. "I look like this? How can I look up to you?" Su Buletinling took a look and saw that the little peach blossom face was tied up with branches, and only a pair of eyes were outside. It was indeed wrong, so he walked forward and untied the gauze wrapped around the cheek, revealing a thrillingly beautiful face. Little Dehua pursed her lips. Although she didn't like being drawn in, she couldn't run away. After thinking about it, she smiled, revealing her 2 dimples. "All right." Su Buletinling looked at it with satisfaction, sat back on the chair, and smiled with his wives, waiting for the photo to be taken. The painter nodded, picked up the brush, and was about to start writing when another voice suddenly came from behind the girls. Etc. The girls were stunned and looked back, only to see Zhu Manzi's face flushed, standing between Chu Chu, Qingye and Sining. Zhu Manzi is indeed a bit small, even Yu Fu is a little taller. If she is drawn like this, she will probably only be able to draw a head. Ha ha ha. The garden could no longer hold back the laughter. "Why are you laughing? I am petite, delicate, round, and beautiful. Zhu Manzi pouted, a little aggrieved, and walked to the front silently, squatting with his hands on his knees, and letting Bai Ying stand on his arms in order to look impressive. It's just that this stance is obviously a bit out of place. Su Buling thought for a moment, got up, found a stool, placed it behind his chair, and then sat on the chair, using the hem of his robe as a shield. Zhu Manzi was a little reluctant at first, but for the sake of formation, he reluctantly ran to the small stool and stood as tall as Chu Chu, putting on a sweet smile. Ha ha ha. The girls kept laughing. Zhu Manzi smiled and was about to cry. Su Buling was afraid that he would really make Manzi cry, so he quickly raised his hand and pressed it down, pretending to be the head of the family, and said seriously. Okay, let's start painting. It may be printed in the history books in the future. If the painting is ugly, there will be no chance to do it again. When the girls heard this, their smiles dropped and they posed carefully. The palace painter had been waiting for a long time. At this time, he took a brush and began to draw carefully on the rice paper. On the lantern festival of the first lunar month, there was a gentle breeze. The garden is full of warblers and swallows, but the scene is almost frozen. Therefore, the girls were carefully dressed up, looked dignified and behaved politely. Even Manzidu looked like Lu Hongluan, with her hands folded on her waist, assuming the posture of a noble lady. Zhongli Jiju didn't forget to put Yi on his shoulders and let Yi hold a small beetle. Chen Xining held two swaying little snakes. But painting obviously takes much longer than taking photos. Su Buling kept a bright smile and waited for a long time. Gradually, his mouth felt a little sore. There were whispers behind him. Have you finished painting? Don't talk, or your mouth will be crooked. My legs are sore. Who told you to stand on tiptoe and be half a head taller than Chu-Chu? Tisk, ha ha ha. The silver bell-like laughter sounded from the garden again, accompanied by the tinkling of the rattle. The brush stroked across the rice paper, and the vivid painting gradually appeared, as if to leave the garden scene and laughter on the rice paper, so that this warm and happy moment would be passed down forever. End of the play.